Okay, so we are back at trying this online video thing, and today I am going over chapter 6 in biology, which is plant nutrition, where we are going to look into photosynthesis, how plants get the nutrition. We're going to talk about leaf structure, and we're going to talk about limiting factor for photosynthesis. So, green plants are what we call autotrophs, and they do photosynthesis. Autotrophs means they are able to generate their own food. All they need is an energy source, in this case light, and they need a carbon source, CO2. Now, if we just took light, CO2, and water and mix it together, we wouldn't get glucoses, which is the end product in photosynthesis. We need something to make this reaction work. And this is, in green plants, a pigment that's called chlorophyll, which lies inside the plants, inside the chloroplasts. They have the ability to capture the light, move electrons, and thereby capture carbon and store it as glucoses. In real life, this is a way more complex process. It would make a very long video just describing how the electrons move around in this, but for this purpose, what's important is that if you have light plus CO2 plus water, you give oxygen plus oxygen and sugar. Now, for the core part of the syllabus, this is enough just to know that, alright, light, CO2, water gives oxygen and sugar. If you're doing the extended, it's important that we balance this equation. So in this case, it's 6 CO2 plus 6 H2O plus light gives us 1 C6H12O6, which is sugar, plus 6 O2. So this is a balance equation, and for those of you doing extended, this is the one you need to remember. Now, plants don't use all the energy that hit them to create photosynthesis. A lot of it is either bounces back from the leaves or is absorbed different places. So it's not like all the light that hits a plant will make photosynthesis, but some of it do, and that is what creates the sugar that powers the plant. And it also creates the oxygen that we have in our atmosphere and which keeps us alive. So without this chemical reaction, none of us would be here. So it's kind of a big deal. So now it's time to look at the structure of the leaf. A leaf, when you see it, might just look like a flat green surface, but actually we have different layers doing different stuff. On the top here, we have the waxy layer called the cuticle, which lies here on top of the upper epidermis. Now the role here of the cuticle and the upper epidermis is to give structure to the leaf, and the cuticle has a waxy layer which also helps to limit water loss from the surface of the leaf. Then down here we have all the cells that lies here in a row like a palisade. That's called the palisade mesophyll, and below that here, with more openings, air openings, we have the spongy mesophyll. Mesophyll means middle of the leaf, so they are the middle structure of the leaf. In here, we see these small green dots here, and these are our chloroplasts, where the chlorophyll, who is doing the photosynthesis, lying and do their job. Down here, we see an opening. This is called the stroma, and the stroma is surrounded by guard cells. And this is how the plants can help control diffusion by opening or closing the guard cells. And here we find diffusion of CO2 going in, and we find O2 going out. So the different structures of the leaf each has a different role. Down here at the bottom, we have what we call the lower epidermis. Alright, so let's take a look at how leaves are adapted for the role they have. This is a badly drawn plant, but hopefully you get the idea. Now the leaf has to do several things. One is, of course, it has to capture CO2 from the air. To do that, we have a large surface area and we have many openings on the bottom of the leaf, which means that we will have diffusion of CO2 into the plant, which then will help power the photosynthesis. Another thing the plant needs is to be able to capture light. To do that, most leaves have a large flat surface, which gives a lot of surface area for the light to hit, so we can have a lot of photosynthesis. Now, of course, for some plants this is different. Plants in the desert often go for smaller leaves, as it's more important for them to combat water loss than to get enough light. But in general, plants want to have as large a leaf surface as possible to capture as much light as possible. The last thing needed is water, and water diffuses into the roots, and we'll get into more detail on how that happens, and it moves through the xylem all the way up here into the leaves, where it eventually evaporates, and by doing so it also drags up other nutrients that the plant needs, such as nitrogen, sulfur, phosphorus and so on from the soil. So not only does this transport here gives us water, it also gives us many of the other nutrients that are important for plant growth. So now we talked about that the plant can make glucoses, but what does it use the glucoses for? Well, one is for energy. The plant itself can use glucoses as an energy source, and it can be broken down to provide chemical energy through the process of respiration, which is exactly the same as animals do. It can also be stored as starch. Starch are long chains of carbohydrates, and it's an easy way for the plant to store carbohydrates for longer use. Glucose is simple sugar. It's soluble in water and it's quite reactive, so you want to store sugar for a longer time. It is a good idea to make the long chains instead. So starch is a polysaccharide, and it's a large molecule and not very reactive, and it can be made into granules and is easily stored in the plant. So for example, when we look at a potato, there's a lot of starch in it. This is where the plant has stored energy for next year. It can also be used for making proteins. The plant needs to make proteins for making enzymes, so on, just as we do. It already has the carbon, but then it just needs other things as well. They have the sugars they need, but to make amino acids they need mainly nitrogen, and that it will get from the soil. There's plenty of nitrogen in the air, but as it is in the form of N2, it's not reactive, so the plants can't get it. They need to be able to get it from fertilizers and other stuff in the soil. So when the plants make protein, they do it from the carbohydrates they already have, and from other nutrients it will get from the soil. It also needs to make chlorophyll, and for here it needs again the carbohydrates, and it needs magnesium, another element it gets from the soil. The last thing is the plant can make sucroses. Sucroses is also a small sugar, but it's less reactive. It's still small, so it's easy to move for the plant, but being less reactive, it can easily dissolve into the phloem vessels and can be distributed into the plant's different parts when they need to. And sucroses can then be broken back into glucoses, or it can be turned into starch and stored. So the carbohydrates the plants make can be used for a lot of different things, both structurally and for energy and for protein creation. So the last thing we need to talk about is what we call limiting factors. Of course, if there's no sunlight, there won't be any photosynthesis, and increasing sunlight will make photosynthesis go faster. So we draw that as a graph here, up here. On the x-axis we have light, on the y-axis we have our rate of our photosynthesis. As if you have very little light, there'll be very little photosynthesis. Increasing light will of course increase the rate of photosynthesis a lot, but it will eventually drop off and we'll reach a point of saturation where adding more sunlight will not make the photosynthesis go any faster. The same for carbon dioxide. If there is no carbon dioxide, of course, we don't have the carbon for photosynthesis, so there'll be no photosynthesis. If we add more carbon, it will go faster, but also here we will eventually reach a saturation point where adding further CO2 will not speed up the process. By the way, these limiting factors here are different from different species of plants. It's not like it's the same for everything. It's very individual. The last one here is temperature. Temperature is a little different because, of course, it's very cold. We'll have no photosynthesis, and as temperature goes up, it will speed up. But eventually, if it gets too hot, we will start seeing proteins getting broken down, and water loss will increase. So we'll get to a drop-off point, again, depending on what plant it is, where the rate of photosynthesis will go down. So it's important to remember that there'll always be one thing limiting growth. For example, in greenhouses, we have a transparent roof, we have plenty of light, we can keep the CO2 concentration high, and we can keep the temperature high, so that way we can grow vegetables as fast as possible. But if, on the other hand, we have some places with plenty of light, plenty of CO2, but the soil is very cold, that will limit our rate of photosynthesis.